Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I am Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson and happy 2021. We thought we'd never get here, but we are officially here. It's a new year and there's lots to talk about. Still feels a little like 2020, but only for 15 more days, because guess what's happening in 15 more days? Joe Biden will become the next president of the United States, and we all cannot wait for that day to come quickly enough. Since November, we've been having our eye on this place called Georgia. There's been a little campaign going on still.
We sure
there,
have.
little election, right, Rick? And
little bit.
Today's the
little
day,
bit.
right? Today's
Little
the
bit.
day.
Even as we speak.
Right. Right. It's finally election day in Georgia, for goodness sakes, for the 2020 election that it won't end. And we have lots to talk about tonight. We have some great guests coming up for you. We have Robin Kemp, who is a local reporter on the ground down there in Georgia, who will be checking in with us. She's chasing a story right now, so she'll be with us in a little bit, and we'll talk to her about what's going on down there. We also have with us Nancy Abudu, who is a deputy legal counsel for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the voter suppression efforts and the history of that in Georgia and runoffs. And what everyone is waiting for, the one and only Marc Elias, who is the lawyer who has been kicking Trump's ass up and down the legal corridors here of the United States, leading the charge in many of the election fraud cases that Trump has brought. And Marc is here with us tonight to talk all about that and more. So, as always, we want to hear from you. So send us your questions at #AskTheBreakdown. If you have specific questions for one of our guests or for us, say who it's for, and we will try to get the question answered for you. And I just want to say that Rick Wilson,
Yes.
It has been only a few days into the new year. We also have our Zoom call.
Yes.
So call in and we'll let you guys answer actual live questions.
Come at us the new school way.
Right. That's right. Rick, it's the new year. We're only a couple days into this, and it has been an absolute crazy town experience since the new year. I think we should take a look at what we've missed since the last time we were all together.
Why don't we do that?
Yes.
President Trump's attempts to hold on to power are driving a wedge into and possibly through the Republican Party.
Cruz is among 11 Republican senators who announced today they will object to the certification of the election results.
I will object to the Electoral College vote.
But one person who does not appear to be on board with this is the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell.
President Trump slammed Republicans like him yesterday, dubbing them the Surrender Caucus.
The cold, hard truth is President Trump did not carry the state of Georgia.
President Trump can be heard pleading with Georgia's Secretary of State to alter the vote count.
Trump and Biden were both in Georgia campaigning ahead of tomorrow's dual Senate runoff.
President Trump falsely claimed that the special elections are invalid and illegal, but this morning he urged people to vote in them.
I don't do rallies for other people. I do them for me, right? And I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, because if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Rick, I'm going to let you go first in reacting to that.
Well, I mean, look, we are in a position right now where there's a group of Republican members of the Senate, about a dozen of them, and about 140 members of the House, who are actively engaged in a seditious plot to overthrow a legally constituted American election. It would shock the hell out of us, Tara, if we lived in any other time frame But right now we live in the time frame of the Trump era and the cult-like devotion to Trump that drives all these things with all these people. And it is a remarkable and shameful moment for our country, but it is one that we have now, that now seems kind of par for the course in a weird way. And it's a great disappointment, but it should not come as a great shock at this point. Now, the real question tonight in Georgia that we're gonna discover soon enough is, did all of Trump's rhetoric about a fraudulent election, about a phony election, did all that rhetoric add up to turn down Republican voter turnout in Georgia? Were they angry or were they depressed? And I think if they were angry, they may be coming out to vote. If they're depressed, they may not. We're going to know that very soon. All the polling has been like this close for weeks and weeks and weeks. Our own numbers have been very, very tight. And, allied groups' numbers have been very, very tight. But we're going to find out very quickly now how much of a role Donald Trump's last rally played, how much his claims about voter suppression played, and how much that crazy phone call over the weekend, which I can't wait to ask Marc Elias about that, because that phone call struck me as one of the most insane moments of Trump's insane presidency.
Which is a lot of insanity. And to think, just when you think you couldn't get any more insane, right? Just when you think it couldn't get any more outrageous, like he was impeached over a phone call he made to the Ukrainian president, trying to solicit dirt on his opponent, Joe Biden. And he was impeached over that. That was something that a lot of us were horrified over. And as we were listening to that on Sunday, I said to my husband, I was like, if this is what we heard, what was recorded, imagine how many dozens upon dozens of phone calls over the last 4 years have been worse than this that we don't know about.
Yeah.
It is an extraordinary thing to contemplate, given all of what we know in public of the things that Donald Trump has done that have been so egregious and unconstitutional, illegal, unethical. It is it's a laundry list. It's a litany of wrongdoing. And here we are in the final days of this administration, and once again he shows his ass. And at least the Georgia Republicans there were smart enough to record it. I guess they read Michael Cohen's book and took some pointers from him.
It is truly a matter of my rule of everything Trump touches dies is in massive play right now. You've got everybody in Washington in a state of complete panic. The ones that are the opportunists who are running for office in 2024, the Ted Cruzes, the Josh Hawleys, etc. We know what they're going to be doing. They're going to do everything they can to make Trump happy. The ones that are the grown-ups in the room are saying, "Hey, stop." That's a very small number. Mitt Romney, to a smaller degree, Toomey and Sass, and a couple of others. But we're in a situation right now where the demands that Trump has exercised over the GOP and has always received instant and total obedience from the GOP, those questions are now in his mind of why won't everyone do it when I really need them to?
And why won't the Supreme Court do it?
The civil war he's causing, right? Why won't my Supreme Court do it? So the civil war he's causing inside the GOP right now is all of the deliciousness.
It is going to be a sight to behold. They are cannibalizing themselves, and if this doesn't wake some people up, I don't know what will. We're literally watching a coup attempt happening in this country, which are words I never thought I would ever hear come out of my mouth. Let's get into Georgia. We have our first guest tonight, Robin Kemp. She's an independent journalist and founder of the Clayton Crescent, and she is joining us to talk about what's happening on the ground down there in Georgia. Robin Kemp, welcome. Uh-oh, looks like we lost her. And we've got her back.
Oh, we lost her. Oh, out.
There she is.
It's been kind of an evening.
Yeah. It's been kind of a year already, and we're only a couple days into it. Robin, welcome. I'm glad we were able to get you back. You're literally out there as the intrepid reporter that you are, chasing down stories as we speak about this election. Tell us what's going on.
Nothing is going on. I'm really sorry about that. I got a tip that supposedly allegedly, some members of the GOP were following around elections workers in a town called Forest Park. And so I went over there and went to the police station where I was told I would get this information. And they said that they had heard nothing of the kind all day. So there you go. There's that. I got nothing.
That's okay, though. That's good. I'm glad that it didn't pan out, that there were crazy people following election workers and possibly intimidating them. We don't need any problems. It's bad enough here in the Washington area. We've got these insane Proud Boys and lunatics out on the streets of Washington, D.C. for the next couple of days, and God knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So nothing is actually good. You're there in Clayton County, and those who aren't familiar with the Atlanta metro area, explain why Clayton County is really important to this election.
Well, Clayton County is kind of been treated as a stepchild in the Atlanta metro for a long time. It's not part of the city of Atlanta, but the city of Atlanta owns the airport that sits on the land in Clayton County, and that's a whole other show by itself. All of the light industrial and trucking and logistics things are down here in Clayton County. And so we're kind of that blue-collar neighborhood from the 50s that just never got updated and has a lot of old factory jobs. There used to be a military base here, Fort Gillem, and that got taken down during BRAC. There's a little Gillem enclave there. They do things like forensic science and stuff for the Army. But what they've done with the rest of the land is redeveloped it and made a big logistics center. So there's money is what it boils down to. And in Clayton County, during the presidential election, as you guys might know, the last little bit in Georgia to be county came down to Clayton County. And that's probably why we're talking now. I was covering it for the Clayton Crescent, which is my local website that I started up. And I was live tweeting the proceedings. There were a lot of people coming in who were elections observers. They were just packing the joint over the course of the day and into the wee hours and making these really, as far as I could tell at the time and ever since, unsubstantiated claims of what they said were irregularities that they saw, ballot commingling, whatever. And when I overheard this, I would ask them straight up. I said, well, can you describe to me what you saw? And then they would refuse to do it. And this went on, and Manuel Iglesias was in there. All these bigwigs from the GOP were in there at one point in the day. Folks who were with the Purdue campaign and folks who were with Trump campaign. And that I heard from their lips. So I don't know what the focus was on a county that is really about 80% or so Democratic. I mean, you're never going to win an election over here, so why do you care what goes on here? And if there were things that should not have been happening, why didn't you file a case in court? Nothing. Never happened. So
do you think that has to do with the fact that it is a predominantly Black county that is forgotten in some places, like you said, it's a stepchild, and that they were looking to find places where they could claim there were some shenanigans going on, and that their folks would believe that narrative because there's a preconceived notion that many of these places where people of color are, like Philadelphia and Milwaukee and Atlanta, are places where we need to be suspicious of people who are voting, and there's always something going on. Is that possible?
I don't want to speculate as to their motives. I don't really know what goes on inside those folks' heads. So I'm just going to stay far away from that. But I can point to what I actually saw, and I saw nothing that looked untoward. And I asked them, and they wouldn't say, and they never produced any evidence, and they never showed up with any kind of court case. And I can only look at this pattern all over the country and say, well, I guess this is like the full court press. Maybe that's the strategy, is to just literally throw stuff to the wall and see what sticks.
Rick?
I do think it's interesting that they've tried this shotgun approach the entire time. They just blast out accusations, they blast out allegations, and they've been rejected over and over again. But are you finding that even Republican activists, is there any skepticism about the the degree to which, I mean, I know the rank and file Republicans, both in the polling we've seen and in the exit polls today, basically said, oh, 75% of them think the election was fraudulent. But like the professionals, at the county level, the versions of Raffensperger and others at the county level, a lot of those are Republicans. Are you seeing the same sort of like eye roll with those people too? I mean, they know their elections are not run fraudulently, and that voter fraud here is a trivial, element in this whole thing.
I personally don't know of a whole lot of Republicans at the county level. I think that some who may be are probably in the legal system and aren't going to cop to whatever party they belong to. But I've really not gotten that. What I have seen, though, is, of course, from Secretary of State Raffensperger's office and from Gabriel Sterling, who works in his office, just the constant denial of these, completely unfounded claims. And it's almost like every day they're up there debunking claims that have no evidence and, let's say it, no basis, and you can't prove it. If you can't at least demonstrate something that might lead you towards proving it, then what do you got? And they're Trump guys. Raffensperger, he said it. He voted for Trump. Sterling voted for Trump. And frankly, if you look at both of their official state websites where they post statements, they post extremely partisan statements. On their state websites. I find a little bit shocking, to be honest. But they're insisting that the count was good and that the machines are fine and, everything is done according to the book. And Raffensperger is a real by-the-book guy. He's an engineer. So he's about numbers and he's about probabilities and he's about making sure that machinery works. They have taken a lot of abuse, I think, rather unfairly. They made a big show of going around and demonstrating the new machine about a year and a half ago before the election. And, I was casting a hairy eyeball on it because it's a big fat government contract and, the history of voting machines in Georgia. But I had the chance to interact directly with Mr. Raffensperger, and he walked me through the machine or the ballot marking devices. They don't call them voting machines. They call them ballot marking devices. Because there's like the poll, and then there's the actual touch screen where you pick your choices. And then there's the special printer that prints on special paper. And you take your special paper, you look at the human readable part, which is, letters and numbers, whatever, people's names. But you can't tell what's in the barcode. And that's the real beef that people have is you cannot, with your human eye, read the barcode that supposedly represents what is to the left on your printed out ballot. And then you slide that.
So is that why people, they were using some of that they're reliant on the machines to read them? And so that's giving an opening to those skeptics claiming voter fraud because of that.
Even talk about the barcode. That's the thing about it. That's ridiculous. That's the weak link. If you want to make an argument against the system, why aren't you complaining about the barcode?
Because it requires too much critical thinking, and it's easier to just do attack signatures or that the Chinese were involved and hacked in, and this one's made up brother. And conspiracy theories are a lot of times just absurd, and it's amazing how many people can buy into it. But Robin, we are going to check in with you a little bit later. Thank you for joining us. And if anything happens, let us know. But we'll be checking in with you a little bit later as we get some more results in from
Thank you.
Georgia.
I appreciate you me back a little bit.
Yeah, no worries.
Speaking of Georgia, let me give you a quick update here at 9:20 p.m. East Coast time. % of the votes tabulated so far. We have David Perdue at 50.11 and John Ossoff at 49.89. That is a 7,000 vote difference between them. We have Raphael Warnock at 50.28 and Kelly Loeffler at 49.72. That is about a 12,000 or 13,000 vote difference between those two, I guess. And we are looking at a runoff that is going to end up with a recount if these numbers hold up at this level. We are still waiting on some stuff to come in.
How many percentage are reported? Because you went out a little bit.
67% have reported in so far. We are, but
Little
we are
ways to go.
we're still waiting on a couple of major counties in the Atlanta metro, one that's quite blue and one that's quite red, and some stuff in South Georgia. So it's it's going to be a long night, guys.
Close.
It's going to be a long
Yeah,
night.
it's gonna be close, and I think it's important
don't
for
cry
people
or
to know.
celebrate yet.
Yeah, people to know that we're probably not going to know who won tonight. They still have to. We'll know faster than we did during the presidential election because they've made some tweaks to speed things up. But it still may take a day or so for them to count everything. You still have overseas ballots. You still have, mail-in ballots that had to be counted. So, it's okay. They're going to keep counting. If we don't know tonight, that's all right. We all expect it to be really close anyway. So, some places to keep an eye on. Places like Cherokee County, which are normally very heavily Republican. What's the Republican turnout there? Some of the other counties where they've had lower Republican turnout than they did in November, which has been the biggest concern for Republicans because Trump his rhetoric about election fraud is suppressing the vote potentially there for Republicans, and that helps Democrats. So state party officials and Republican elected officials are not happy about Donald Trump's behavior because it could potentially suppress the vote enough to cost them the Senate. So we'll see. Pay attention to some of those counties. Speaking of suppressing the vote, I think that's a good segue into our next guest tonight, Nancy Abudu. Do we have Nancy? There she is. Nancy.
Hey, Nancy.
Nancy is the deputy legal director with the Southern Poverty Law Center, where she focuses on voting rights. Welcome to The Breakdown, Nancy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Well, great to have you with us.
Yes, because we're talking about a runoff, which is extraordinary in and of itself, because usually no one gives a shit about runoffs going on in a state that isn't theirs. And even in states that are theirs, a lot of times people don't give a shit about runoffs. The voter participation rate is usually really, really low. That is not the case today. In Georgia, it appears that the voter participation rate is higher than it was for the general election in November, which is hard to believe, which is great. I think that's great for democracy. The more people voting, the better, legally voting. But there is a certain nefarious history about runoffs that I think a lot of people do not know. That runoffs were an effort to disenfranchise Black voters. Without going too much into the weeds, can you explain a little bit about the history of how runoffs were designed to disenfranchise Black voters in Georgia?
Absolutely. Well, one, in terms of the national attention on this issue, I don't only focus on voting rights issues in the state of Georgia, I'm also a Georgia resident. So I can attest to the number of postcards and other letters I've gotten all over the country making sure that I registered and voted. So we definitely appreciate the level of national attention and support. In terms of Georgia and its history when it comes to voting rights, everyone, of course, has to remember that Georgia was a major slaveholding state. And the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments, which ended slavery, which provided equal citizenship, at least to Black men at that time, and then ensured that African American men had the right to vote, resulted in the highest number during Reconstruction of African Americans registering, voting, and being elected to all levels of office. So, of course, white segregationists, those who were concerned about the dwindling of white power, had to create another system to work in this new constitutional context to still limit the rise of African American political power. And the runoff system that we're currently experiencing today is a result of that. It was originally designed to make sure that African Americans did not successfully consolidate their voting power such that their candidates of choice got elected as compared to white candidates. And today we have someone like Mr. Perdue who is caught up in a runoff, even though he technically got more votes statistically because of that pre-Jim Crow era law that wanted to make sure that white candidates were able to consolidate power.
That's fascinating. And I actually wasn't aware of that history until one of our Lincoln Project brothers, Stu Stevens, brought that up recently about that. And I said, really? I'm from New Jersey. So some of those, old tricks of the South to disenfranchise people of color and their votes, I take that for granted because I didn't grow up with that. And I think that that's an important point for people to understand why the efforts of folks like Stacey Abrams and others on the ground in Georgia to turn Georgia blue and get as many people of color registered and voted is so extraordinary. What she's been able to accomplish over these last few years, the historic value of that, I think, cannot be overstated.
Absolutely. I think
Somebody's
that for
back on
sure.
VMix.
I was just going to roll with it.
Yeah, it's all right.
In
Sometimes,
terms
the technical gremlins happen. It's all right. Just keep it moving.
Just keep it moving. No,
Right.
for sure. For those who look at this purely in political context, yes, I think if you want to color the map and talk about red versus blue versus purple, there's definitely been a demographic shift there. But I think that we shouldn't get too ahead of ourselves and that we shouldn't eliminate the possibility that you have people who could still consider themselves Republicans who voted for a Democrat simply because they were so discouraged, displeased, and disheartened with what was going on with the Republican political party. I think someone talked about this implosion that's happening earlier, and that's what we see in real time in Georgia. And so for sure, you have Georgia voters, regardless of their political affiliation, are aligning with politicians and policies that are more progressive, that are going to make sure that every child has a adequate education that's going to really address the issue of criminal justice reform. And those we're happy to see are issues that cross party lines when you talk about the people and not the politicians.
Mm-hmm. Rick?
I think that certainly is one of those things that we're looking at in right now. The one of the most disturbing things to me, at least, is what underpins this move in the Trump allies in the Senate is really about disenfranchising African American voters. Where are they trying to overturn votes? In places like Georgia, in places like Pennsylvania, in places like Detroit, Michigan. They are looking, the only pathway here where this whole allegation of massive voter fraud and throwing out the results of these elections, they will by the core of what they want to do, disenfranchise millions of African American voters. And we look at the right to vote as the hardest one and highest tier of the things obtained by the civil rights movement for African Americans. And it is a shameful moment, I think, that these 12 members or 14 members, however many it is in the Senate, and 140 in the House, they understand what they're really doing here. It's not just protecting Donald Trump. It is telling Black voters that their votes don't matter at all, and that they can be thrown out on a political whim. I mean, do you see that? Have you seen that as an emergent sort of awareness among African Americans that's the underpinning result of what these guys are trying to do in the Senate?
The awareness, I would say, in my humble opinion, has always existed. I think that the shock and awe is coming from progressive white communities or perhaps some more affluent communities that haven't seen or experienced this kind of behavior in decades, if at all. And so I believe that what we need to be concentrating on next is what is the impact of a political party that is trying so desperately to consolidate power when the national sentiment is going in the opposite direction. What do they have to gain? Now, we know in practical consequence, it's maintaining their positions of power. But in reality, it's a replay of what we're experiencing now. African Americans are being disproportionately impacted by COVID. Our children are being disproportionately impacted by low-performing schools. And the disproportionate impact of African American communities continues in almost any issue area you look at. So that is what we are focused on. We're trying to make sure that whoever is elected and is in Congress this coming session, that they hold true to their campaign promises and that we see concrete improvements in the lives of Black people and in our society as a whole.
I think that there's been a racial reckoning going on in this country since the George Floyd killing and the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer has really awakened white America in ways that I don't think we've seen since the 60s. And the idea of voter suppression still happening at the level that it's happening in 2020 was a shock to a lot of people because they thought that that was in the past. That's what the Voting Rights Act was supposed to cure. And what do you mean there's still efforts, pretty blatant efforts in places like Texas or Georgia and others to try to stop people of color, minority communities from voting. And I think that's a good thing that now people are made aware of what's going on, because if you don't know and you're not paying attention, you can't fix or solve the problem. So before I let you go, Nancy, what are some of the biggest improvements that you see moving forward or the priorities as far as voting rights in Georgia or nationally that you see that we need to address moving forward so that we avoid some of the tactics of the past?
Well, I think one positive thing is that we've heard more conservative voices, a growing body of conservative voices speaking up in opposition to this movement that we see being led by Donald Trump. That is a good thing, and that is what we need. We need that kind of cross-political party coalition building to move to the next steps, which includes some serious legislative reform. The Southern Poverty Law Center is going to be focused on strengthening the Voting Rights Act. We want to make sure that the shenanigans that we experienced even during this 2020 election cycle do not resurface. We have permanent protection for communities of color, especially in the South, so that we do not have to continue to feel under attack every time an election cycle comes around.
Yep, absolutely. As my grandfather, Captain Emil Setmayer, used to always say, pay attention. And I think that the more people who pay attention to what's going on, the more activism and the more problem solving and the more people, the righteous anger of the American people emerges to get something done. So keep up the great work, and we'll see what happens in Georgia tonight. It's a nail biter, as everything is. It wouldn't be 2020 extended without some type of drama, but I'm sure we'll all be paying attention, make sure there's no shenanigans. Nancy Abudu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
So, Rick, before we bring in our next guest, I have to address the fact that you have a glorious portrait behind you, which seems to be a new addition to your background. Please explain what's happening there.
It was a wonderful Christmas gift. It's a wonderful Christmas gift. And can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. It looks to me like it's a Christmas gift of the nameless cat. Is that true?
Yes. Guys, I'm getting like every 10th word right now.
That's okay. No worries. I will cover for you.
I'm gonna come back into vMix, y'all. I just let me restart this.
All right. We're gonna let Rick get his technical difficulties together, because it wouldn't be the new year without a couple of gremlins. Everything's a little rusty. We've been off for a while. It's all good. While he does that, before we bring in Marc Elias, who I know is waiting in the wings, we're going to listen to some excerpts of the Trump tapes.
The people of Georgia are angry. And these numbers are going to be repeated on Monday night, along with others that we're going to have by that time, which are much more substantial even. And the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
You should want to have an accurate election. And you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have. Not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
I'm telling you, it gets worse every time. You want to laugh, but the sheer just mafia-like tactics that Donald Trump uses. He's a dumb Tony Soprano. At least Tony Soprano was smart and his mafia bosses were savvy most of the time. Donald Trump is a wannabe in every respect, even here, a wannabe mafia boss, and he can't execute that well either. It is just so outrageous what he did. And the fact that that the entire Republican leadership didn't march down Pennsylvania Avenue and do what they did during Watergate and tell Donald Trump enough is enough, we're done here, is extraordinary on so many levels. Instead, it's been the opposite. We've now seen these Republicans like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz deciding to still move forward with contesting the certification on Wednesday and further engage in this coup-like attempt to overturn a free and fair election. It's extraordinary, it's outrageous, it's infuriating, and thank you, Jesus, it will be over in 15 days. Well, so I want to bring in our next guest, Marc Elias, because he is a hero in this effort to push back on Donald Trump's legal, vexatious litigant behavior in this whole voter fraud shenanigan. And just so folks who don't know you, Marc, I'm going to read a little of your bio. Marc is an attorney who is nationally recognized as a campaign finance expert, voting rights and redistricting law and litigation expert. He's considered one of the leading recount and post-election attorneys in the country. He's also the founder of Democracy Docket, which focuses on detecting, highlighting, and combating suppressive voting laws and practices. Marc Elias, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. And it's a great night to be here because we're in the middle of the long-awaited Georgia Senate runoff elections.
Yes, and that phone call is relevant. You actually were involved in some of the back and forth over the weekend about the veracity of what was happening in the context of that perfect phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State, because the state party chairman of Georgia came out and tried to bullshit his way out of this on Sunday afternoon when this blew up, to say that it was part of a litigation settlement or agreement, negotiation or something, that there was some kind of litigation still going on, and that the recording of this conversation was some breach of something, some violation. And you hopped in and you said, not so fast. Explain.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've been doing for the last few months is sort of hopscotching against Donald Trump's efforts, along with his allies' efforts, to overturn the outcome of what was, as you said, not just a free and fair election, but actually one that in the end wasn't all that close, right? I mean, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won by 7 million votes. They got more than 300 electoral votes, which Donald Trump last time described as a landslide. And when you join these lawsuits, we've been intervening as defendants, essentially, as he and his allies sue states or counties. We've been intervening on behalf of either the Democratic Party or someone, to essentially fight against those lawsuits. I was quite surprised that the state party chair, the Republican state party chair, seemed to reference that this might be some type of settlement discussion of at least one of the lawsuits that I'm representing a party in, and I wasn't invited to the call. So I don't know how they were going to settle anything, since we would have had to have been involved in any settlement.
Right, exactly.
I think it was the most preposterous and insane explanation. I mean, the thing about Trump is he and his allies come up with some pretty preposterous explanations for why the things he does that are crazy are okay. Right. But honestly, this was a really stupid explanation.
Well, I mean, the bar is set pretty low, right? I mean, you've got people talking about the Hugo Chavez ghost is responsible for rigging voting machines in Georgia. So, it's par for the course with these people. I got a chuckle out of that because obviously I follow you on Twitter because I find you to be the preeminent Trump ass kicker in a court of law, which is amazing. And you keep account of how many cases the Trump team keeps losing. What are we up to now? They're one for what, 62?
62. Today they hit 62, which really was unimaginable if you think about it. Only a few weeks ago, we thought they might not get to 50 losses. And yet they have continued to power through and have now achieved their 62nd loss in a federal court today in Georgia.
But what do you
It's
mean?
remarkable.
I mean, how could that be possible? As according to Donald Trump, they won this election by a landslide, and the judges they won't let them present their cases. They have all of this evidence. They have affidavits. They've got hundreds of thousands of votes that they claim that were not being counted. Explain to the sane Americans why their cases continue to get thrown out. If they had all this evidence, why won't the judges let them present their cases?
So two things. First of all, it's actually wrong to say that the judges are not letting them present their cases. The fact is, we had a hearing, an evidentiary hearing in Nevada, a state that nevertheless Senator Johnson continued afterwards to suggest that there was some uncertainty around. We had an evidentiary hearing in Arizona. We've had evidentiary hearings in a number of states, in Wisconsin, where the fact is that the Donald Trump and his lawyers, and in many cases, not just him and his lawyers, but his allies and their lawyers as well, have had an opportunity to present this evidence, present witness testimony, present affidavits, depositions, documents, whatever it is. And the fact is that where they present that evidence, the courts have universally rejected their claims and said that their evidence doesn't amount to anything. So yes, some of the cases have been thrown out procedurally because they're just frivolous cases. And at some point, the courts don't want to keep litigating over and over again the same frivolous case. But it's simply not true for he and his lawyers to say they haven't had their day in court. They've had several days in court. They just don't have a good case.
Right, exactly. And does it frustrate you as you watch this why more people aren't a bit firmer with him? When I listened to that tape, I was like, for God's sakes, will you people just say, listen, this isn't true. What you're saying is delusional. We've had this investigated, 10 times over. The courts, both Republican and Democrat appointed judges, have ruled against you because the evidence is not, sufficient enough. Cut the shit. I don't understand why more people don't just stand up to Trump and say this.
Yeah, I am frustrated by it because the fact is, and just take Georgia for a second, and there was a fleeting reference to this on the tape, and to that extent, I give the secretary credit. But the fact is that in Georgia, we did a full hand recount. So, like, whatever you might think about the voting equipment, whatever you might think about anything else, they literally counted the ballots by hand.
Right.
So you
paper ballots.
Paper ballots. They counted paper ballots by hand. So, like, none of this other mumbo jumbo about Spider and Hugo Chavez and these affidavits, none of it would mean anything because the ballots are the ballots. They're pieces of paper that were counted by hand. So I do find it frustrating, and I find it frankly despicable that more than 100 members of the House, and it looks like almost a dozen Republican senators, are going to now try to justify this in some fashion. They'll fail, and Joe Biden will be sworn in. But all they're doing is besmirching their legacy and damaging our democracy. And I don't really care about the first, but I care deeply about the second.
Absolutely, as do I. I mean, imagine for someone like myself and others who have been lifelong Republicans watching this happen. I was watching CNN today, and there was a segment between Anderson Cooper and a former Senate parliamentarian. And Mark, you've been around a long time. You know the Hill. You know what the House and Senate parliamentarians are like. These aren't exactly people who are known for their charged language, right? Parliamentarians are pretty by the book. It's about the rules. They don't come any more straight-laced than freaking parliamentarians. And Alan Fruman is a former Senate parliamentarian, and Anderson was asking him about Pence's role, and let's put it straight here. Can Mike Pence, does he have the power to overturn this election during the proceedings tomorrow? And Fruman said no, he doesn't, and he explained why. And Anderson said, if we were looking at this at another country, like a third world country that decided to have free and fair elections, and then their government attempted to do what Republicans are trying to do, that would be considered a coup attempt. And the former Senate parliamentarian said, I will not dispute that characterization.
Mm-hmm.
That sent chills down my spine as someone who knows the disposition of a parliamentarian, especially the Senate side.
Right. Yeah, right. Right. Very buttoned up, yeah.
Right. And I thought he would say, well, I won't go that far. It's literally not hyperbole to use the coup word. Did you ever think in your decades of being in Washington and in politics that you would ever see this happen in America?
No, I didn't. The hallmark of American democracy is that you have so much of it that is ingrained in the norms and the expected behavior of our elected officials. And whatever disagreements over the years there have been between Democrats and Republicans, there was always, in my view, a true sense on both sides of the aisle of a commitment to the peaceful transfer of power and to democratically held elections. And it wasn't that long ago that everyone would say, either happily or unhappily, elections have consequences. And what's remarkable is that the notion that elections have consequences now being replaced by a large chunk, not a small chunk, but a large chunk of the Republican Party, no longer thinks elections do have consequences. And if elections don't have consequences, then what you have is a dictatorship and authoritarianism.
That's right. And you need two healthy parties. Dissent was to balance each other out. That was the idea. Speaking of dissent, we've got a good dissenter. We've got Rick Wilson back with us. Rick, welcome back. Are you good to go now?
We have overcome our technical bumps, and Mark, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Before the internet gods or Antifa blows up my connection again, I want to ask you a question. You are now basically 60+1 against these guys in these cases. Is it because you're a great lawyer, or is it just that they're putting out the most ridiculous assertions and reaching so far on these things that even judges are going to be friendly to them are just basically laughing them out of court? I mean, it seems like a combination of you doing great lawyering, but also these guys just, it's like they're not sending their best, is what it seems like.
Yeah, and I've said this before that I like to think that I and my team are good lawyers, and I think there are cases where we've shown that. I think in the post-election we really haven't needed to show that. I mean, most of what we've been doing is traffic hopping a series of frivolous lawsuits and making sure that they are responded to and that judges have them teed up for prompt resolution. So, it is less a function of the quality of the lawyering and more the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won, a very convincing election. The results weren't that close, and therefore the legal theories were not that available to them. And then they went with a bunch of lawyers who have, frankly, brought bizarre claims and have been largely laughed out of court. So, no, I don't think it's been particularly because of the quality of our lawyering.
Well, I do think you've actually, but I think you actually gave a lot of people a sense of calm and encouragement during the course of this whole shenanigan, because there is a temptation, especially when something as esoteric as election law, people's eyes tend to glaze over a little bit, and they worry that Trump is going to, quote, get away with something. And I want to thank you on behalf of America and our audience for not letting them get away with a lot of something in at least 60 odd cases now.
Yeah,
and counting,
because they're still going. I mean, look, I've sat with candidates who have won, and I've sat with candidates who lost. I was the general counsel to John Kerry's presidential campaign, and I was the general counsel to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. So I know what the temptation is after the election. But part of the job of a lawyer is to tell your client, this may have been a close election, It may not have been a close election, but it may have been a close election. But here are the facts. Sometimes you lose close elections. And so, if you go back and look at the statement that John Kerry, I looked earlier today, the statement that John Kerry sent out to his supporters literally on the eve of tomorrow, but in 2004, he said, I'm not going to join in any of the protests of the results because my lawyers have spent several days on the ground and said that there is no legal basis to a challenge. So, I think that that's part of the responsibility of the lawyers. I think, frankly, you two would agree, given your background, it's part of the responsibility of good political staff and campaign leadership. Yeah. And I don't know if that just didn't happen here or if Trump is so deranged that it just didn't matter.
All of the above. It's all of the above. There's nothing good about Donald Trump or the people who work for him or the campaign that he's run or his legal counsel. Because they're just so incredibly deranged and narcissistic, and that it doesn't come from a good place. And nothing that they do comes from a good place. Whereas, Hillary and Kerry and others who have lost, they still cared about America. They put the American, this great American experiment we call democracy ahead of their own egos and personal things. Like, I can't imagine how difficult it was for Hillary Clinton to give that concession speech, losing by only 77,000 votes. Way less, much closer than Donald Trump. Donald Trump got his ass kicked compared to Hillary Clinton. And she still went out there and was gracious and did the statesman-like thing and conceded. She could have done what Donald Trump is doing with more justification, frankly. But she didn't.
And again, this is what the Republican Party that I grew up fighting, but where there were two strong parties that were committed to this. I remember flying to South Dakota in 2002 when Tim Johnson won an election over John Thune, and John Thune didn't even call for a recount. I think the total margin was under 1,000 votes. Yep. Conrad Burns, who I couldn't stand, senator from Montana. I fought hard for John Tester. Conrad Burns conceded a close election without a recount. Now they did that not out of altruism, that they did it because it wasn't going to change the outcome of the election. There weren't enough votes. They were close, but it wasn't close enough. Kelly Ayotte in 2016, same thing. So I can point to Democrats and Republicans who have looked at the situation and have been advised well that it's simply not there. And what's remarkable is that the Republican Party has completely abandoned that ethos and is now, for Donald Trump of all people, for Donald Trump of all people, they're willing to sacrifice all of their integrity on these issues to carry his water. And I don't understand it. And it's really unfortunate for our country.
You're not the only one who doesn't understand it. A lot of us don't. And it's alarming in a lot of ways, because we look at what's happened, what's being ginned up, what's being encouraged. We look at what's, being mobilized right now in Washington, D.C. There seems to be no limit to what they're willing to do and attempt to take down our democracy with it. But I feel as though, thankfully, that since Joe Biden was elected, that there will be enough pushback to keep it all together. A lot of people wonder, is there any consequence for some of the batshit crazy things that these lawyers that have been representing Donald Trump have said and done? I mean, the outrageous suggestions by Lynn Wood of arresting Mike Pence and lining him up against the wall for a firing line for treason. And Sidney Powell, we already know the lunacy she has said. You have said that that there should be some consequences. What in the legal world? What are they?
Yeah. So look, the consequences are there can be sanctions, monetary sanctions imposed for filing frivolous litigation, and there could be bar consequences for lawyers who act unethically. Just earlier tonight, the city of Detroit filed a motion for sanctions against the lawyers who had brought one of the lawsuits there, seeking both monetary sanctions and bar disciplinary actions. Federal judge in D.C. suggested that at the end of the case that was just dismissed, this is that silly lawsuit that was filed against the Electoral College in Washington, D.C., Judge Boasberg said that when this case is over, he's going to likely issue a show cause order why the lawyers there are not subject to disciplinary or other sanction. So I think that process works. But what I've proposed is actually something more significant moving forward, which is right now lawyers owe an obligation to the court and to their clients. And if they violate their obligations to their clients or to the court, then they're subject to sanctions. I think we need to add to that, to our democracy, that lawyers should not be permitted ethically to take on causes that undermine core democratic institutions. And they should not be allowed to say things that undermine core democratic institutions. It's not to say that people can't take on controversial cases or advocate zealously for their clients, but seeking to declare martial law should cross a line that gets you that the bar should take notice.
Well,
Rick, go ahead.
I mean, actively engaging in these both these propaganda efforts to try to discredit and sway people from believing in the results of the election, to the sort of lawfare in the Senate that these guys are practicing. I mean, I think it is these guys are almost all attorneys. You know, Josh Hawley is an attorney. He understands exactly what he's doing.
They clerked
and
for
look,
Supreme Court.
Jenna Ellis may be a traffic lawyer. She may not understand what she's doing, but a lot of these guys, the guys who sleep with the Constitution in their pajama pockets, like Ted Cruz and others, these guys know what they're doing.
They do know what they're doing.
Tara, you're sassy.
I'm sorry, but I'm not. I don't think that they're exactly, having a passionate love affair after he's licking the boots of the man who called his wife ugly. He sold out his family and his wife to Donald Trump and to further his career. So that's why I said what I said. Carry on.
Yeah, they're lawyers,
Indeed.
and they take an oath, and they as lawyers should understand what that oath means. One of the other things that I've suggested, and oddly enough, I think I never thought that Chip Roy and I would be on the same page, but I wrote something in December that said that one of the reforms I think is that Congress should adopt a rule that if you challenge the results of an election for which you were a candidate, then you should not be seated without your credentials being scrutinized. Because if you're a congressman from Pennsylvania and you say there was fraud in Pennsylvania, why should you be seated? If you're a congressman from Georgia and you're saying there was a fraud, why should you be seated? And I thought that Chip Roy, of all people who I otherwise have nothing in common with, when he moved to set aside those delegations from being seated, I think there's something to that. I think there needs to be a consequence for making irresponsible allegations and suggestions that, again, undermine the fabric of our democracy. If you notice, when it comes to challenging the credentials of their colleagues in Congress, none of these folks are so brave. They're only brave when they're challenging the credentials for president, when they have no skin in the game.
That's right. Absolutely. And, that's wonderful that they want to speak up now, but, it's a little freaking late. They had the opportunity to do this many times before. They had the opportunity to remove this miscreant during the impeachment hearing. He's had multiple offenses that were impeachable. They should impeach him again after that phone call on Sunday. And but yet here now, when they have their 6-year term, they'll survive longer than if Donald Trump had gotten reelected. Now all of a sudden their balls drop. I have no patience for it, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But they're the ones that are going to have to contend with their legacies and explain it to their grandchildren as they move forward. Mark, you've been so generous with your time. I just have one last question for you before we let you go tonight, because a lot of people are watching and our viewers are very engaged, and they always want to know, what can they do to keep the pressure on? Not everybody's a lawyer. They can't do the work that you do, or, take up cases and things like that. But what can the average citizen do to keep the pressure on these people and hold them accountable for this seditious behavior?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. I wrote another piece earlier in the before the election, which, if you listen to Kamala Harris's the close of her convention address, she said the question will be, when your children and your grandchildren look back on this time, what did you do? Right? What did you do to stand up for democracy? So I think that what people need to do, whether they are famous or they are not famous, whether they have big platforms or small platforms, is they need to speak out. They need to be willing to stand up in the public square and say, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. And it's one of the reasons why, candidly, I look forward to being on this show tonight, because you all did exactly that. The easy thing to do if you were a Republican consultant and you did not like Donald Trump was to just be quiet and figure he'll eventually go away. But what we need people to do is to stand up in the public square at sacrifice to themselves, at sacrifice to what their friends and their colleagues and their coworkers will think of them, and to speak out and say, this is not okay. And that those people who do that are the heroes, whether they are one person standing up in a coffee shop or someone standing up in, with hundreds of thousands of people on YouTube. So I don't think it's about what lawyers do in the courtroom or anything like that. I think it is about telling your colleagues, telling your neighbors, telling your customers, telling your clients, telling your friends, telling your family that it's not okay. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Right. Well, thank you, Mark. We appreciate you saying that. And thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. And hopefully you'll get a little time off here from the legal merry-go-round that you've been on here with the Trump carnival for the last few months.
God willing.
Right. Well, after spending years and years of being the opposite side of you, the name Marc Elias used to bring fear to those of us on the Republican side. If we had to go up against you and things, we go, oh man, they got Marc Elias on this. And it's nice to be on the same side with you, fighting to help save our democracy. So it's a pleasure. Keep up the great work, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. He's great. Fantastic.
Right. Yeah, it really is.
Let's get to some callers.
Yes. Who is our first caller? I think we have Erica from Connecticut.
Erica from Connecticut, how are you this evening?
Hi, guys.
Hi, Erica.
How are you?
Hi, Tara. Mark, big fan of the Lincoln Project, and I think EA Wright. And thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Well, you're very welcome.
Mark couldn't have put it better.
Thanks for coming on tonight.
You have a question?
So how are you tonight? What's your question?
Well, I guess my question is, what do you think is going to happen if, in the scenario, one wins and one loses tonight?
Look, that's a real possibility right now.
I mean, I know logistically. And then what happens to the Republican Party after that?
Well, if one wins and one loses, then it's still Republican control, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick. Rick, you started to say, or did I lose you? I think we might have lost Rick, but just to fully answer Erica's question. So if one wins and one loses tonight, then Republicans still retain control of the Senate. The Democrats need both to win, then it'll be 50-50, and Democrats will control the tiebreaker because the vice president is the vice president, is the president of the Senate. So you have the ability to break ties that way. So if one wins and one loses, I mean, it's good for the state of Georgia. Let's say, for example, Reverend Warnock wins tonight, which as of right now, it's looking pretty good for him, which would be extraordinary. He would be the first Black senator from Georgia, and he would make history. So that's great, and for the people of Georgia, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be enough to flip control of the Senate. And if the Republicans are still controlling the Senate, I fear what that will look like. If we thought that the obstruction during the Barack Obama administration was a lot, this will be on steroids. So, we'll see. They're still counting votes, so we'll see what happens. Do we have Robin with us? She back?
Can you hear me?
Give us a report. There she is.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Robin.
We got you, Robin.
Yeah, it turns out there is something afoot. I don't have all of the details,
But there is an investigation going on about this alleged following around of Clayton County elections workers. That is really all I know about it. There is an officer in there, plain clothes, with a pistol on his hip, looks like a detective. I don't know if he's from Clayton County, if he's from the Secretary of State's ballot or election fraud office, or who he's with. But he is in there talking to the election supervisor, and apparently that actually did happen. Apparently it happened in Forest Park, but the Forest Park police were not involved because they said they knew nothing about it when I spoke to them.
Interesting. So now it's confirmed that there was something going on, and you've got a plainclothes, perhaps detective or state official with a gun on his hip, asking questions, finding out what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's not super dramatic or anything like that. He's in there, but, I don't see anybody being thrown on the ground and arrested or anything like that.
Well, I would hope that it doesn't escalate to that situation, as long as they're making sure that the ballots are secure and that there is no intimidation. That's important, because we just don't know what people are thinking at this point. There's been so many rumors and conspiracy theories and misinformation out there that has whipped people up into a frenzy. We saw what happened in Texas, where you had that police officer there off duty ran somebody off the road because he thought that he was doing his patriotic duty to protect ballots, for goodness sake. So, you can never take these things, you can never be too safe with it. Now, are you hearing what Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to tell you what I saw earlier this evening. And it may have nothing to do with anything, but there was a gentleman with a very large American flag on the back of his pickup truck and a 3%er sticker in the back window, who came through the parking lot of the police station, which is right next door to where this elections building is. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting that he's coming out of there right before 5 o'clock on election day. But I haven't seen any kind of signs of any sort of, armed people walking around or anything like that. And it's totally his right to drive around with whatever he wants on his pickup truck. So, but I thought it was interesting that at that time of day, on election day, he was cruising through and flying his flag.
The whole cruising through, flying your flag thing with the pickup trucks is it's an act of intimidation in some places. I mean, here in DC, in the DC area, people with like Pennsylvania plates and plates from states that were northern states that did not fight in the Confederacy are, flying Confederate flags, for goodness sakes, and Trump flags coming to the rally. Why are you doing that other than to intimidate? And I just don't understand why, did they not get the memo? The South lost, okay? The Confederacy lost in this. I don't know why they're flying that flag, but here at the Lincoln Project, we call it the flag of treason for a reason. And their behavior at this point is beyond just problematic. It is becoming seditious and treasonous because they want to overturn a free and fair election. And it's, the people of Georgia are not going to tolerate that. They are moving forward tonight with their free and fair election. And we anticipate that the election will go smoothly like it did before, and we'll get the results. And if there's a recount, they'll recount again if that's what they need to do. And we'll get the final count and it'll be certified. So any last word before we let you go tonight, Robin?
They've counted about a third of the votes in Clayton County. I know that they've counted something on the order of 3 million, I believe, statewide, or 3.1 million. I would suggest that you all follow Georgia Public Broadcasting. They're updating very frequently. And incidentally, they were disinvited from Senator Loeffler's watch party, and I still don't really know why. There are other media groups there because I saw a photo, but she basically told them no, in no uncertain terms, are you coming? And I don't know why that happened.
Well, God forbid that you have a straight shooting news organization that reports the facts without color, and they're enemies of the people because they can't spin it and there is no propaganda involved. And it doesn't surprise me that's what they do. They operate in darkness. They don't want transparency, because if the people saw really what's going on, they wouldn't like it. So Doesn't surprise me too much. It's consistent with the behavior of Trumpists. Robin Kemp, thank you so much. Oh, wait, I have a quick question. Oh, that's true. I have a quick question for you. I'm a huge fan of Chick-fil-A, and I know that Chick-fil-A was started in Georgia. Is the original Chick-fil-A in Clayton County?
I think the original is just over the line in very far south, Fulton County, right next to the airport in Hapeville.
Right, I know it's close to the airport.
Yeah, it's just over the county line.
Okay, because my husband's triplet brother lives in Atlanta, and we flew down there to see him about 2 years ago, and we were, driving from the airport to go to his house, and we saw Chick-fil-A. We were hungry. We were like, yeah, let's go get some. And when we got there, we didn't realize that it was the original Chick-fil-A, and we were very excited about that fact, that historical fact, that we had stumbled upon the original Chick-fil-A. So when you said that Clayton County was, the airport was there and it was right there, I'm like, I wonder if the Chick-fil-A is in Clayton County, but it is not. It is right over the border. So
like 2 or 3 blocks over the county line. There's another really old one in too, though, in Forest Park.
But not the original. So shout out to Chick-fil-A. We love you. All right, Robin. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Keep up the great work.
Right. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.
All right. So I think we have a tweet or two from our viewers tonight. Okay, how as a nation are we to deal with all the morons and sycophants faux news OAN has made? They put in decades of misinformation. That's from AMC in Dallas. I wish I had an answer for this. I'm not quite sure. There are a lot of people who are trying to figure out what's the best way to handle these people, because it's really become almost the same tactics you need to deprogram people in a cult. The level of disinformation that has been coming out in such large numbers, the echo chamber is what has created the environment we're in now. And it used to be just talk radio, and then Fox News came along, and now the internet, and you have these other channels with OANN and Newsmax that are feeding this, and it's created a monster. And I'm not quite sure how we do this, because they don't care about facts. It's emotionally driven, and facts don't get through to them. So if you were watching our show the last show before the new year, we had on Dr. An from University of Michigan and Linda Ong, who are a part of a Protector, I Am Protector campaign, where they talk about the ability, what to do, how to get through to reactants, people who are resistant to being told what to do and who don't really want to listen to facts. How do you get through to them? And there's science around this. So my suggestion would be to check out Dr. An's behavioral science work over there at University of Michigan and see what they found. Ways to talk to reactants. They say there's 30 to 40% of Americans who fall into this category, because we're going to have to figure it out, because this is not going away anytime soon. But in the meantime, people like us and others will continue to tell it straight and combat the misinformation with accurate information. And the more information you're armed with, the more informed you can be, so you know how to push back a little bit when you need to, because we have to. I say often that telling the truth in a time of universal deceit is a revolutionary act. And we're living that revolution every single day. What's the next tweet? All right, My Train 666. If Mike Pence doesn't do 45's bidding and announces Biden, do you think 45 will punish him by locking Pence in a room alone with a woman? I think that mother would intervene first and would never, ever allow that. All right. Before we go tonight, speaking of Mike Pence, I think we should show our latest Mike Pence ad. It's the very toxic bromance between Donald Trump and Mr. Pence. Check it out.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. He's a wonderful man and a smart man and a man that I like a lot. One thing with him, you're going to get straight shots. He's going to call it straight. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Oh, Mike Pence. What is he going to do tomorrow? We all wait with bated breath to see, does Mike Pence actually have the intestinal fortitude to hit the gavel and claim Joe Biden as president of the United States, certify the election. It is simply a pro forma thing tomorrow. I want to remind people, Mike Pence has no authority, none whatsoever, to overturn the election tomorrow. He has the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and federal statute spells it out that the president of the Senate basically is there to count the votes, open the envelope, count the electoral votes, and say, yep, certified, Joe Biden is president of the United States. That is it. All the other hijinks and everything that you see tomorrow is nothing but political theater. And it's shameful what they're doing. And they're deceiving so many of the American people into believing that there is some way to overturn a free and fair election. There isn't. So tonight's call to action is to pay attention tomorrow to what goes on and make a note of who these seditious senators are and who these seditious congressmen are. And if they live in your district or represent your state, remember who they are, remember their names, and hold them accountable in the next election, because they will go down in history as being part of an attempted coup in the United States of America. And that should never, ever be okay. So that's the call to action for tonight. And be sure to join us. We'll be back on Thursday. We're going to talk about the results in Georgia. We're going to talk a little bit about that Russian hack. Remember that thing? Yes, it's still going on, by the way. Intelligence services have said, yeah, it was probably Russia. It wasn't probably, it was. We're going to talk about that and a bunch of other things on Thursday. So we'll see you Thursday night. Until then, go Georgia.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just watching my algorithms get crushed. I guess I did something to piss off the Instagram gods, so hopefully you're seeing this stuff anyway. We'll do what we can. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.